This is a picture of a man who took up arms to protect and extend one of the most abominable institutions in the history of the world, slavery. When his home state of Virginia decided to break away from the United States in 1861, a move designed to continue the enslavement of millions of people, he put on the uniform of the Confederate States Army, served under General Robert E. Lee in the 11th Virginia Infantry, and was later captured and held in a prisoner of war camp. A member of his family smuggled some gold to him, and he managed to bribe a guard and free himself, only to learn that the Civil War had just ended anyway, and that the cause of slavery and the secessionist country he served were no more. I never met this man. He died almost 60 years before I was born. But in his life, especially his life after the Civil War, he had a very large and very positive impact on my family, and indirectly on me. You see, this man was my great-great-grandfather. Hi, I'm Fredo Rockwell, and today I'm speaking to you from Lexington, Virginia, a town right on the fault line of an important cultural convulsion here in America, the reevaluation of our Confederate past. This is a statue of General Thomas Jackson, more commonly known as Stonewall Jackson, a man who, according to many, was a hero and a genius. Like many towns across the South today, especially following the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, Lexington has removed many of the trappings of its Confederate past, but not this statue. You see, this is Stonewall Jackson's grave. He is buried below it, along with several members of his family. The reason he's buried here is that before the Civil War, he lived in Lexington and taught at the Virginia Military Institute, located just a short distance from where I stand now. As you can see, his grave is marked by small Confederate flags, as are hundreds of other graves in this cemetery. And here at the foot of his statue are lemons. Jackson famously enjoyed sucking on them while on campaign, and they are often left at the foot of his grave as some sort of votive offering or something. This is University Chapel, until recently called Lee Chapel, on the campus of another Lexington institution, Washington and Lee University. Inside is the elaborate tomb of General Robert E. Lee, the man that men on both sides of my family fought for, who retired to Lexington after the war and was president of Washington and Lee, then just called Washington College. Outside the chapel, you'll even find the final resting place of Lee's famous horse, Traveler. Being the home and final resting place of two of the Confederacy's most famous citizens, Lexington is steeped in Confederate symbolism and history like no other town in the United States. But thankfully, even here, that legacy is receding. Buildings, organizations, and places across this town are dropping Confederate references, although the process is far from complete and not universally supported. This is not my hometown. I grew up hundreds of miles farther south, in another part of the former Confederacy. But I am very familiar with Lexington, and yes, I am very familiar with the unqualified reverence that this town once held for the Confederate States. Although I find it shameful to admit this today, I once thought that was a very good thing. For many white Southerners like me who grew up in the final decades of the 20th century, the Civil War wasn't just something you read about in history books. It was all around us. Confederate flags were a common and uncontroversial sight. I grew up near Peachtree Creek in Atlanta, the site of an important battle, and finding musket balls and other remnants of war was a fairly common experience. My home state of Georgia had incorporated Confederate symbols into its state flag, a sign of official approval of Confederate ideals, if there ever was one. And at Stone Mountain Park near Atlanta was an enormous engraving of the three main heroes of the Confederacy, Lee, Jackson, and Confederate President Jefferson Davis. In the summers, my church youth group would visit Stone Mountain for a laser show, which in the final minutes saw these three Confederate leaders come to life and gallop with swords drawn while Dixie played. The audience, including me, would whoop and cheer. I feel huge embarrassment to admit this now, and it actually feels surreal to even think about. I don't remember anyone ever sitting me down and telling me that the Confederate cause was good and just, but this idea was implicit in much of the culture around me, even if no one said it out loud. I never heard anyone defend slavery, not even close. Everyone seemed to understand that slavery was wrong. And I quite naively bought into the idea that slavery wasn't the main issue of the Civil War. If you press someone where I grew up, especially if they were a white Southerner like me, whose ancestors fought for the Confederacy, we would say that once you look past the slavery issue, which, I mean, right there, you're on dangerous ground, but if you could look past the slavery issue, then the Confederacy stood for lots of good things. It stood for decentralization of power and individual freedom. Both of these are huge lies, of course. We also believe that Confederate soldiers, our ancestors, fought heroically against great odds, and man for man were much more honorable and gallant than their Yankee counterparts. And besides, we were pretty sure the Confederacy would have ended slavery eventually if it had won the war. Slavery just wasn't the main issue. These were all lies, of course. Lies which had been carefully constructed over decades and passed on from generation to generation. On some level, I think most of us understood that these myths were not completely true, but we were desperate to believe them. We were desperate to believe that our families had fought for something good. We embraced lies because I think many people, including me, thought that we had some sort of obligation to those men who fought and died. My family fought for the Confederacy. It was our side, so to speak. And that gave me a sense of duty to preserve their memories and present them positively to the rest of the world. Let me be really clear. I don't think this way anymore, and I feel aghast to think that I ever thought like this. It's embarrassing and shameful. And this is the main question I wanted to ask in this video, and one I'm going to pose to you, the viewer. Obviously, supporting the Confederacy is wrong, whether you mean supporting its true history as a white supremacist state or its sanitized mythology. But was I right to feel a sense of obligation and duty to my ancestors and my culture? If the Confederacy had won the Civil War, God forbid, I would be a Confederate citizen today. Am I betraying my culture, my almost country, by denouncing it today? I hope that, like me, you'll agree that I have no such duty, not to the long-dead Confederacy or its modern myths. But I would argue that many of us feel a similar sense of reflexive duty to other institutions, our communities, our churches, our countries, and our cultures. I'm a citizen of the United States, a real country with many flaws and dark chapters in its history. Is it my duty as an American to be an unqualified patriot, to defend the actions of the American government no matter what they are? When American drone attacks kill civilians at a wedding, should I give the U.S. government the benefit of the doubt? Should I argue that the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were justified because they were meant to make Americans safer? This might sound controversial, but I would say my duty to the U.S. government is exactly the same as it is to my Confederate past. In other words, I don't think I have one, not a duty which I must fulfill no matter what. I'm not at all ashamed to be American. I am extremely proud of it. Over its nearly 250-year history, America has done great things and made the world a better place. I firmly believe this. But I also admit that America has done some horrible, terrible things in its history as well. And under the leadership of George W. Bush and Barack Obama, my government killed countless civilians in 2 pointless wars. U.S. military and intelligence services have interfered with and invaded I don't know how many countries, pretty much stolen huge parts of Mexico, and engaged in what has to be called genocide to remove the native people from the land that white people wanted. These are horrible things, and as an American, I feel no duty to justify them or try to explain them away. Many people watching this video will come from countries and cultures where honest criticism of the past is accepted and normal, but I know from some of the comments I've received on my videos that many of you do not. For many of you watching, nationality and culture are not just influences on your life, they define who you are. They are essential parts of your identity. When I make a video which criticizes Russia, Morocco, or Somalia, some of you don't just disagree with me, you get angry. To you it seems like a personal attack. I'm attacking who you are, and you think it's none of my business. I've never taken offense to the many comments I've received calling me stupid, ignorant, or telling me that I'm obviously being paid by the Algerian, Somalian, or Russian governments, or just telling me to butt out and go away. I understand these emotions. I have felt them myself. But I would invite everyone watching this video to reevaluate your sense of patriotism. Every country has dark and unpleasant parts of its history. Heck, even Canada has had to deal with some absolutely horrible revelations recently. And tiny San Marino once ruined the lives of some of its elected politicians just for being too left-wing. To me, being a patriot means exposing wrongdoing to scrutiny and criticism, not hiding it. How else will we ever make things better? So this is how I evaluate the political situations I cover in my videos. I try my best to look at the situation dispassionately, to evaluate what is good and what is bad, no matter which countries are involved. No country's past is perfect. So what really matters is what is happening today, and what looks likely to happen in the future. To me, the story of Somaliland is so inspiring, not because of its struggle for independence in the early 1990s, but because earlier this year it held an amazingly free and fair election, which puts much of the rest of the world to shame, including my own country, the United States. I'm not exaggerating when I say I think this is one of the most important accomplishments made anywhere this year, maybe this decade. Somalilanders have real reasons to be proud of their country because of what it's doing today. I hope in future, when something goes wrong, and eventually something will, that Somalilanders will be able to openly face their problems and try and correct them. That is how we all make progress. When I examined the conflict in Western Sahara, it was clear to me that there is wrongdoing on both sides, and that the Polisario Front, which represents the Sahrawi people, is far from perfect. But in my opinion, Polisario has been much more willing to face up to its past than the Moroccan government, and Polisario has signed the Geneva Call, an agreement to no longer use landmines. I may cover this in another video, but landmines are incredibly destructive and inhumane and leave problems stored up in countries for decades to come. But the Moroccan government refuses to give them up. I don't hate the people of Morocco or Somalia or Russia or China or from any of the countries that I cover or will cover in future. I am critical of their governments, and I'm willing to criticize certain points in their history, but I am just as willing to be critical of my own country and my own heritage. Wherever you are from, I invite you to do the same. I really, really want you to know that I understand how difficult this process is. The process of shedding a national narrative built on lies. I've done it myself. This is a small town, a hamlet really, a few miles away from Lexington, and right there is the grave of my great-great-grandfather. I never knew him, and he is long dead, but I've grown up hearing stories about him. By all accounts, he was a decent and honest man. I got the chance to know many of his grandchildren, and one of his granddaughters was my grandmother, who is one of the kindest, most wonderful people I've ever had the chance to know. So I can't help but feel a sense of affection for him. Judging the decisions that a person made who lived so long ago is difficult. I think we are all products of our time and culture, much more than we are willing to admit. And because he's part of my family, I feel this instinct, this pull, to try and justify him for that decision that he made, to defend the Confederacy. But I can't. Not anymore.